Alrighty, let's move into Unit 1b. So, Greater Unit 1, it's all about the historical and scientific roots of psychology. 1b is all about research and statistics. Not a super exciting topic, I know, but we have to learn it. You've gotta know it because it is vital for everything that you do going forward. We're going to come back and we're going to use the terms you learn in this unit in every single unit for the rest of the year. So you gotta have it. You gotta have this stuff. So, research methods. For today, we're going to focus on why do we need psychology studies, and two, what are the types of psychology studies. So first, why do we need psychology studies? The short answer is that we are dumb. We as humans are dumb. We have all of these things built into us over the course of our lives that are supposed to help us. And what they do is they help us think quickly. They help us think on our feet, recognize patterns, and like protect ourselves mentally so we're not like stressed and anxious about things constantly. But those also get in the way of discovering truth. Okay. So we need science and research because research fixes and kind of takes those problems out. So three big reasons for that. One is hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is the human tendency to say, I knew it all along. Right after you complete something, or after evidence comes out, you quickly say, I knew that, right? I definitely understood that, but you didn't, right? And that is shown over and over and over again. In surveys and studies, people will answer one thing and then afterwards they'll be like, how confidently did you know this fact? And they'll say, I felt very good about it at the beginning, and be like, you didn't say that before the survey. People always think they know what they're talking about when oftentimes they don't, right? Like favorite reference is my girl T Swift. I knew you were trouble when you walked in. You probably didn't, right? Like that's something after the fact. Hindsight bias is in the way, and now you're looking back and be like, I knew that all along. What was I thinking, right? Or I knew we were going to lose. It's like, no, you didn't. You just now looking back on it. Hindsight is 2020. That is the hindsight bias, right? Next, the second one, and if you get a chance, go check out Captain Hindsight, a great character that can really help explain as well. Two, the need for psychology research is because humans are overconfident. We think we know way more than we do. Over and over again, again, people will think they know things, but they can't. Studies like this one, literally people were just given these three things. They were flashed them, and they were showed them for like 10 seconds. They were like, how long do you think it would take you to solve this? The average answer was like 25 seconds. Right, that's how long it would take me to solve all three. And the average time was like 3.5 minutes for most people to solve all three of these, if they could solve them at all. Right. So hindsight bias and overconfidence can kind of work together on this one as well. Right. Like if in the past we've had these, especially if you see them after, if we know what the answers are, you're like, I would have done that way better. Right. When you're watching a game show, it's so easy to look at them and be like, why are they doing it that way? I can't believe they didn't do it this way. I would have done well. You're overconfident, right? The answers to these, in case you were wondering: water, entry, barge. Third reason is that we see order in random events. Which of these is the most likely sequence? Right, I'll give you a second to think about it. None of them. All of them are the same, right? And everyone, right? Almost everyone makes this mistake, right? Unless people are versed in statistics, almost everyone will say, oh, 3 is way more likely. THTHT is way more likely. Or I could put a bunch of these on there. THHTH. Any random sequence, they all have the same chance. But our brains automatically put patterns together, right? And again, that's to save us time so that we can rapidly make decisions. But oftentimes there's not a real pattern, right? If you flip 5 heads in a row, it was chance. It was random. You flip 5 tails in a row. The odds of the next one, 50% heads, 50% tails. Right? That's also called gambler's fallacy. When you think, oh, there's been a lot of heads, there's going to be a tail soon. I'm going to put a lot of money on tails. Every single time it starts over, 50% chance. Right? So all three of these have the exact same odds. And the big idea is that we think there's patterns when often there's not. This is where conspiracy theories happen. This is how QAnon and Pizzagate and vaccines cause autism and anything like that. Like these come out of people thinking they see a pattern when there is not a pattern, when the science and the actual research, which is why we need it, prove that those things aren't there, right? Like once we actually do the research and prove this is not the case, we should believe it. That's the idea. Some people still don't. But Second thing we're going to talk about. So one, people are dumb. We need research to kind of fix our natural tendencies to look for patterns. Two, what types of studies are there in psychology? So there's three big types of studies that you're going to need to know. One is descriptive, two is experimental, and three is correlational. Okay, descriptive, experimental, correlational. You need to know all of them really well. So let's talk about these a little bit more in depth of what they mean. We're going to have a full day focused on each one of them, but today I'll go over just a big idea. One, descriptive. Okay, descriptive observes, descriptive describes. Okay. Descriptive is not meant to prove anything. It's just to show that something is happening, right? It's getting people's opinions. It's getting how people feel about things. It's describing what's happening over the course of someone's life, right? So there's a number of these different types of studies, case studies, where we're looking at a unique case and we're describing what's happening there. We'll talk about all kinds of examples of that. Maybe most famously, Phineas Gage got a railroad tie that went through his eye and into part of his brain, and he lived, right? Clearly, we can't just take people's brains out for fun and study them. So this guy was something that deserved studying. They weren't trying to prove anything. They were just trying to describe what happened when he had that part of his brain taken out. Naturalistic observations is just looking and seeing how people act. Surveys, longitudinal versus cross-sectional studies. We'll talk about all of these in depth when we get there, but all of these are types of studies that just observe and describe behavior. Two is experimental. These are experiments. They are probably the most important one because of this. I'm going to say this a lot. You're going to forget it, but I need you to remember it. Experimental is the only study that can show cause and effect relationships. Okay? So if you ever want to use language that when this happens, this is going to happen, or this causes means this is more likely to happen, you can't use that language unless it was an experiment. Okay, so an official experiment that controlled variables and you manipulated different types of variables to show that cause and effect relationship. Okay, that's the biggie. It is a controlled environment experiment that shows cause and effect or attempts to show cause and effect relationship. It can't always show it. Correlational studies show relationships. They show connections, but they don't show cause and effect. Okay, there will almost certainly be a question about that on the test. Okay, last year there were you have to break down a study. I had quite a few students miss points when they said that a correlational study showed cause and effect. All it did was show a connection. Okay, it just showed a connection. It didn't show effect, right? Like if we do a study to look at how many hours that you're watching TV per day and what your GPA is, and we show that there's a connection, right? That people that watch more TV have lower GPAs. We cannot say if you watch more TV, you'll have a lower GPA. We can't show cause and effect because of that. It was just a correlational study. It showed the connection. It didn't show cause and effect. Okay, this should make more sense once we get into these, but for now, if nothing else, know that. Experimental can show cause and effect. Correlation shows connections, but it can't show cause and effect. All right, a couple things that you need to know for all studies, words that we'll use constantly. Theory and hypothesis are similar. They're just kind of like one is a little bigger, one is smaller. Theory is the big grand idea that you're making hypotheses within. The theory is your organization of all of your observations, the big idea or your prediction in some way. And then you can make a number of hypotheses within that, right? So the hypotheses will be a little bit more specific than the theory. The theory is broad. Hypothesis tends to be a bit more specific, right? Operational definitions. This is maybe the most common term on the AP test, right? At least for the last 7 years, it has been on there every single year. Every single year. You got to know it. So what an operational definition is a statement that defines exactly what a word means in your study. Okay? It's not giving a dictionary definition. It means in the purpose of your study, what does this word mean? Okay, so for instance, in this one, the research question, right, is do relaxation techniques improve memory? Right. So the theory would be that there is a connection and relaxation techniques help our memory. Then a hypothesis would be a little bit more specific than that and would say this is going to improve our ability to remember things. So the problem here with operational definition is what does all this mean? What relaxation techniques? Are you watching Netflix? Are you on your phone? Are you listening to music? And then improve memory. Memorizing what? Right? Faces, a song, words, memory over time, memory over a couple days. You've got to clearly define. Otherwise, you don't really know what that means. Okay, so I'll let you practice. 2, here's a hypothesis. People who drive pickup trucks are more aggressive drivers than those who drive other types of cars. If that were a question, if that were a hypothesis, okay, a specific hypothesis, how would you operationally define it? Specifically, what needs to be operationally defined? Give you a second to think about that. Hopefully, you pointed out a couple things, right? Because we can't just operationally define one thing. We're going to need one, what defines a pickup truck, right? That's pretty specific, but we need to clarify, right, what that is. More importantly, probably the most important term, we've got to figure out what is aggressive, right? Is it just driving over the speed limit? Is that aggressive? Cutting someone off? Giving somebody the bird? What does an aggressive driver look like? So you've got to actually define all the actions that would be aggressive for your purpose of your study. And the same thing with other types of cars, right? Does an SUV count? Right? What does a hybrid go into? So you've got to define your terms here. Always define your terms. Final term you need to know is replicate, and this is an important one for all studies. It's our ability to take a study and do it again. Replicate means to duplicate. Okay, do it again, run it back. If you've got a study of any of these types, right, a survey or a research or an experiment or a correlational study, any of those, if you want to really show that your findings are correct, it needs to be able to be done again, right? If you come up with this incredible study and you prove something groundbreaking, most people are going to read it and be like, that's incredible. I've got to try it. And if you have good operational definitions and you clearly showed how you did everything and they do the same study and have the same findings, it's been replicated. And they're like, oh, they were right. But if all of a sudden 5 other people do your study and none of them get the same answer, your findings don't mean anything, right? It has to be able to be replicated, okay? Replicated because that can lead us to reliability. And we'll talk about that when we get into experiments. But it needs to be reliable, meaning that can it be done over and over again? Is it trustworthy, or was it just a one-off kind of thing? Did it work? Did it work one time and never again? So this is a necessity for good psych research. It needs to be able to be replicated. And a lot of times, psych studies are tough to do that with because they're so nuanced. And that can be a major critique in the psych field, is that a lot of it doesn't have the same kind of replication standards almost that other forms of science do. So big ideas of 1.1. First, people are dumb. Science and research accounts for that. And it kind of overrules our base nature. So hindsight bias, perceiving patterns in random events, overconfidence, all of these mean that we make silly mistakes and see things that aren't there. But research is able to kind of override those and take the human element out of it. Studies in psych that you need to know, 3 types: descriptive, experimental, correlational. Understand what each one is. We'll go more in depth, but eventually you're going to need to know when you see a study if that's descriptive, experimental, or correlational, and then what the purpose or value of each one is. And then finally, okay, real quick, I'm going to say this again. Experimental can show cause and effect. It's the only type. Correlational cannot show cause and effect. And some terms that you need to know: operational definition, vital, it's on every test. Theory, hypothesis, and replication. Okay, understand those. Live them, especially operational definition. It's on the test every year. But that's 1b.1. Next time we'll be moving in and talking about descriptive, and then we'll talk about correlational and experimental, and we'll be on our way, folks. Welcome to Unit 1b. Here we go.